So let's set one thing straight here before we get started. Demons are the disembodied Nephilim. What are Nephilim? Well, if you look at stories or anime like Attack on Titan, if you look at world religion and see all the giant stories, these things tend to have a few things in common with one another. First of all, they looked human, but not entirely human. Something was off about them. They would murder, and they would cannibalize one another and humans. And because people prefer darkness over the light, there are some that demons take a liking to. A scripture to keep in mind as we go through this topic today. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Do me a favor before we get started, go ahead and hit the like button on this video. Don't forget to subscribe. I plan on uploading every once in a little while, but it's going to be a very interesting experience on this channel where I do continue to go over pop culture and real life stories of people I believe have been influenced by the devil. This is my list of the top 5 criminals who I believe are and were demon-possessed. Arie Johnson is our number 5 spot. This is the famous "The Devil Made Me Do It" case. This was also the first time that demonic possession was used as a defense in a case. In the early 1980s, Ed and Lorraine Warren attended an exorcism for a little boy by the name of David Glatzel. Allegedly, during the exorcism, Arie asked the demon in David to enter him instead. And then this is where things started going a little bit haywire. It appears the demon complied. Several weeks later, February 16th, 1981, Johnson stabbed his landlord, Alan Bono, to death after a booze-soaked argument. Now, in the real-life story of this, the judge ended up throwing out the defense of demonic possession. Didn't allow him to use it. In November 1981, Johnson was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. If you guys see me looking back and forth here, I'm sorry, there's a lot of stuff to read. I'll actually be putting these articles that I'm referencing in the description below as well for you guys to read on your own time. The case attracted widespread media buzz despite the defense not being permitted in court, and went on to inspire a book and film starring Andy Griffith and Kevin Bacon called The Demon Murder Case. Possession doesn't last 24 hours a day. The real paranormal hunter Ed Warren told the Associated Press at the time. It comes quickly and leaves quickly. Arie understands what happened to him. He now knows if something happens, how to ward it off, and he won't be stupid enough to take on the devil again. One could argue that when a demon gets involved in somebody's life through an actual possession, the demon, rather than leaving, can go dormant instead. Nothing's forcing that demon to stay in somebody. It's up to the demon if it wants to leave or not, unless you bring authority into it. Now, David Glatzel in 2007 claimed that the Warrens actually manipulated this entire altercation and experience. But you guys be the judge. Do you believe that Arie was possessed by a demon? In our number 4 spot, we have Michael Taylor, a man who I believe really is kind of a ramped up version of Arie. Police officer Ian Walker had this to say about this case. Of all the incidents in which I was involved in 30 years of police work, nothing affected me like this one. The stupidity and futility of it all. The complete and utter waste of time, destruction of a family, not to mention the death and other traumas are far beyond anything else I have ever come across. In the town of Ossett in West Yorkshire, England, 31-year-old Michael Taylor and his wife Christine began attending the Gobber Christian Fellowship group, where Michael became close with Marie Robinson, a lay preacher in her early 20s. The Taylors hadn't been religiously inclined up until that point, but went at the urging of a friend and were so impressed by the group's everyman approach to religion that they reportedly converted after a single meeting. After Michael had become an enthusiastic member of the church, he started growing feelings for Marie. Some really intense feelings. It's possible they slept together, but we don't have any evidence for that. So it's inconclusive. We're not 100% sure how far their relationship got. Michael had confronted Marie about his deep feelings towards her upstairs, while the rest of the group was downstairs. On this particular day, she ended up rejecting him. He went back downstairs, proclaiming a victory for the Lord, saying that he had been delivered from these feelings and this infatuation. What happened next is difficult to gauge. Maybe Michael had simply been through too much, having been publicly embarrassed in front of his new social circle and privately shut down by a woman he felt an attraction towards. Whatever the cause, he experienced what was described as a sinister transformation, striking Marie and screaming. Michael's breakdown in his erratic behavior in the days that followed led the church to believe that an exorcism was in order. On October 5th, they summoned the Taylors to the church, restrained Michael, and subjected him to a battery of attempts to cast the demons out of him, burning the tainted wooden cross that he wore and screaming at him until about 7 the next morning. During the court case that followed, one of the preachers involved would state that they'd managed to exorcise over 40 demons from Michael, leaving him behind only 3 associated with murder, violence, and insanity. In just a few short hours, Michael had been discovered roaming the streets naked, covered in blood, and screaming about the devil. Inside the family home, Christine's body lay mutilated. Her face was torn away from her skull, her eyes were gouged out, her tongue was ripped out from her mouth. Chunks of flesh and splatters of blood covered the walls. The family dog, strangled to death, had its limbs ripped from its body. Now, the police were looking for a murder weapon, which is what really threw them off the most. And when they didn't find one and found Taylor covered in blood and found what was underneath his fingernails, all the little details and bits that I'm not sure I can share to YouTube, they had come to the conclusion that there was no murder weapon. Michael Taylor had done this with his bare hands. Michael's trial had found him not guilty by reason of insanity, and a clinical psychologist testified that his actions were a direct result of the intense psychological torment that he had experienced the previous night. Michael would spend 4 years in custody, 2 in the high-security Broadmoor Hospital, and 2 more at the Bradford Royal Infirmary before being released. And none of the members of the church apparently faced any charges. Alright, our number 3 spot is Joseph Methany. This is a quote from Joseph's mother before we get started on his story. Methany seldom contacted his mother after he joined the army. She said he just kept drifting further and further away. I think the worst thing that ever happened to him was... It's a sad, sad story. And it is believed that can open people up to the spirit world. And it seems that Joseph was really deep into it. Yeah, I am going to have to censor this later. A deranged serial killer and turned his victims into human hamburgers and sold them to unsuspecting customers. Joseph Joe Roy Metheny targeted women in the Baltimore area of the USA who had a history of drug or alcohol issues. Metheny, who was known ironically as Tiny due to his 6-foot, 1-inch large frame, stored the meatiest parts of his victims in a freezer. He didn't use all human meat, he actually mixed it with pork and beef and other things, and that's as far as I can say about that. Metheny, who was finally apprehended in December of 1996, would then cook the human hamburgers and sell them to unsuspecting customers from a roadside barbecue shack who had no idea they were being forced into cannibalism. At his sentencing hearing, he also claimed he committed murders because he enjoyed it, that he got a rush out of it, got a high out of it. Remember, he was addicted to drugs. There is a high that comes from drugs, and for him, there was a high that came out of murder. He had no real excuse other than the fact that he liked to do it. Metheny was charged on December 19th, 1996 for the murder of 3 women. While he claimed to have killed 13 people, he only got charged with 2. They could not confirm the other 11. And here is his image that I believe is pretty telling. After this court case was all said and done, Metheny ended up receiving 2 life sentences for this. Initially, it was only 50 years. And this brings us to our number 2 spot, Sharon Lis Carr, also known as the Devil's Daughter, Britain's youngest serial killer. She was brought up by her mother and stepfather. She had 3 siblings, the 4 children had 3 fathers, and it's important to note that Sharon did not know who her biological father was. Her childhood was not pleasant. She experienced a life of poverty and felt the pains of an empty stomach on a daily basis. Sharon's stepfather was a heavy drinker and would abuse his wife and children. Molly was an aggressive woman who frequently vented her anger at innocent children. Her early life, she was actually a good kid. There was nothing that really stands out about her. It wasn't until Sharon started school in Camberley that she started hanging out with a group of kids who were, well, a bad influence. It says here they got her into stealing and buying and selling drugs. She started smoking weed on a daily basis at the age of 11. Sharon started taking an interest in weapons, carrying a knife in her school bag. Sharon's stepfather grew tired of the drama and announced that he wanted to leave the family. He went to Molly, Sharon's mother, for a last confrontation. In a fit of fury, Molly poured hot, boiling oil over George's head. It caused both parents to be hospitalized with serious burns all over. Sharon's mother was charged with assault and their marriage came to an end. I would imagine so. The court ordered Molly to receive mental health therapy for 3 years. For Sharon, this kind of aggression and abuse were normal. She witnessed her mother pouring boiling oil on her stepfather's head and was not surprised or disturbed. This is where we start getting a little bit further into the spiritual. Sharon started practicing voodoo, introduced to her by her mother, who taught Sharon rituals that required sacrificing animals. Her mother claimed to have supernatural abilities. To gain authority and control, Sharon started reciting some prayers at certain times to harm people. In the early hours of the morning on June 7, 1992, Carr fatally stabbed 18-year-old trainee hairdresser Katie Ratcliffe as she made her way home from Camberley's Ragamuffins nightclub. Carr used a 6.5-inch knife to repeatedly stab Ratcliffe, who was a stranger to her, puncturing her ribs, heart, and I can't say the other two, but it's other holes on the body that moving along. After the assault, Carr and a few of her buddies took Ratcliffe's body and drove it to Farnborough, where it was dragged along a road before being deposited near a cemetery wall. And it was found by a group of boys later who were walking around. When you have a tight group of friends who are a bad influence, and you're able to go back to them and say, hey, I need to hide a body, and then they just comply like that, I wouldn't be surprised if they were all practicing voodoo, honestly. According to the investigation, Katie's parents did identify her body. According to the post-mortem reports, Katie was stabbed 32 times. Because of the nature of Katie's murder, they were looking for a full-grown adult. They weren't looking for a child. The fact that she was found naked, police concluded that it was a sex crime case and believed that the killer was a male in his 20s or 30s. Over 500 men were interviewed by the authorities. 2 years later, on June 7, 1994, the exact date when Katie was murdered, Sharon attacked her classmate, Anne Marie Clifford, 13, with a knife in the toilet at a Collingwood College comprehensive school in Surrey without obvious cause. Clifford had a lung puncture after being stabbed in the back, and as a result of her wounds, she almost lost her life. The attack stopped only when 5 students intervened and entered the bathrooms, perhaps saving the victim's life. And according to the victim, Carr was smiling and seemed happy during the attack. Sharon was immediately arrested and taken to an assessment center for psychological evaluation. During the process, Sharon tried to strangle 2 staff members. Because of her erratic behavior, Sharon's charges were increased, adding 2 charges of bodily harm. She was sentenced to 2 years of arbitrary detention. Sharon was sent to the all-boys section at Aycliffe Secure Center due to her violent behavior. She was transferred to Bullwood Hall Young Offenders Institution in September 1995. The staff members believed that they could better control her aggressive and sexualized behavior there. Katie Ratcliffe's death ended up being attributed to Carr because she was actually confessing it on the phone with her loved ones. She also wrote about it in her diaries. She actually ended up developing a crush on one of the prison officers and started confessing to him as well. And I actually want to pull up a quote from her diary as well, because it is pretty disturbing. I'm a killer. Killing is my business, and business is good. I was born to be a murderer. Killing for me is a massive turn-on. It just makes me so high that I never want to come down. Every night I see the devil in my dreams. Sometimes even in my mirror, I realize it's just me. This is very reminiscent of Joseph Methany, who was our number 3 spot. These two seem to have a lot in common when it comes to murder. According to Detective Sergeant Paul Clement, when he was interviewing Carr, there was no logic or emotion interface, and in her mind, there was nothing there. He describes it as her being in another universe. And in 1996, Sharon was charged with the murder of Katie Ratcliffe. After a long trial that lasted a full year, she was convicted of murder. Sharon officially became Britain's youngest ever female murderer. After being found guilty, Carr was smiling as she walked away from the dock. Following her trial, she was given a minimum sentence of 14 years in jail. And I'm pretty sure that continues going up because I don't have the source in front of me, but I believe she continued attacking people, and so they keep adding to her sentence. I'm pretty sure she's not out yet. And in our number 1 spot, we have Jim Jones. Jones was an American cult leader who promised his followers a utopia in the jungles of South America. This was after he proclaimed himself as Messiah of the People's Temple, a San Francisco-based evangelist group. It's believed that Jones was CIA, but it is inconclusive, so we can't really put that in this video. He ultimately led his followers into a mass suicide, which left more than 900 dead and came to be known as the Jonestown Massacre, and this was November 18th, 1978. Now, there is a lot to this man, so we're actually going to skip towards the end when he moved the people into South America and started building what he called later Jonestown. But following the move, Jones, who adopted the name The Prophet, apparently became obsessed with the exercise of power. Before long, he began to face various allegations, most notably that he was illegally diverting the income of cult members to his own use. Amid the mounting accusations, Jones and the hundreds of his followers immigrated to Guyana and set up an agricultural commune called Jonestown. This was in 1977. As a ruler of the sect, Jones confiscated passports and millions of dollars and manipulated his followers with threats of blackmail, beatings, and probable death. He also staged bizarre rehearsals for a ritual mass suicide, so he was preparing for this, it looks like. On November 14th, 1978, Representative Leo Ryan of California arrived in Guyana with a group of reporters and relatives of cultists to conduct an unofficial investigation of alleged abuses. 4 days later, as Ryan's party and 14 defectors from the cult prepared to leave from the airstrip near Jonestown, Jones ordered the group assassinated. However, only Ryan and 4 others, including 3 reporters, were killed. Fearing that those who had escaped might bring in authorities, Jones activated his suicide plan. On November 18th, he commanded his followers to drink cyanide-adulterated punch, an order that the vast majority of them passively and inexplicably obeyed. Jones himself died of a gunshot wound in the head, possibly self-inflicted. Guyanese troops reached Jonestown the next day, and the death toll of cultists was eventually placed at 913, including 304 who were under the age of 18. Some death tolls include the 5 people killed at the airstrip, bringing the total number of deaths to 918. And the reason I put him in my number 1 spot is because we have evidence that he had demons surrounding him. He kept his eyes covered for reasons that people believe you could see the devil in his eyes. And it's believed that we even have demons on camera in his congregation. Here is some of that audio.
We didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide protesting the conditions of an inhumane world. The conditions of an inhumane world.
And here are the alleged demons. If you like this video, don't forget to hit like, don't forget to subscribe to this channel where I go over more spooky facts, whether it is pop culture or real life. My Demonology in Hollywood series is also going to come here, which is a very interesting breakdown of the occult, Hollywood, and how those two things coincide in scripts and on screen. And that is all for this one. Take care, God bless, and I'll see all of you in the next video.